Hello, and welcome back to the Excedo Playback Podcast, the podcast discussing industry news, trends, and tech advancements in the streaming and OTT industries. Today, I am joined by none other than Eric Tang, CTO and founder of Livepeer. How's it going, Eric?
Oh, going great. Thanks for having me, Neil.
Yeah, super excited to have you here. Why don't we just start it off with, do you mind just giving a high-level overview of Livepeer?
Sure. So to talk about Livepeer, I first want to start with Livepeer Studio, which is a high performance and API first video streaming platform that delivers the same quality and service as a traditional cloud provider, but with 80% in cost savings. Now we're able to offer this because we build it on top of the Livepeer network, which is a open source project and a decentralized network that's been in development for a little over 8 years at this point. You can kind of think of it as a marketplace for video streaming infrastructure. So instead of building our own data centers or instead of renting capacity from public cloud providers, we created this permissionless protocol for anyone in the world to supply data center grade compute and bandwidth into this marketplace. So think of it as like a Airbnb or Uber, but for data centers, right? So using this approach, I think we can get to a much better reliability and really great performance for a really big cost savings. And that's kind of our own approach to solving this video streaming problem.
It's really interesting, the peer-funded approach that you've taken. How can blockchains and decentralization be used elsewhere in the video ecosystem? Like, what are ways content providers could benefit from this?
Oh yeah, so there's a lot of experiments that's been done, right? And so I'd say in the last couple of years we kind of seen the boom and bust cycles of blockchain technology and Web3 in general. I think there are a couple of trending couple of themes that are interesting to explore. One is this idea of an alternative revenue stream for creators, right? So there, because blockchain creates at the end of the day, it's like a financial system, right? It creates a new financial infrastructure, but it also allows for value to be more programmable. So that just opens up a whole new space for people to think about how to monetize content. So, for example, what does ownership mean on the internet, right? We kind of currently have this problem of as soon as content gets on the internet, it kind of loses its value because it can be copied. And even though we have DRM, that we can we try to protect the value in that way. It's really a defensive mechanism rather than thinking about, okay, like, is there like a native way for digital information to actually have value on the internet, right? So a lot of there's a big thesis in the blockchain space about, oh, actually, how can we create digital scarcity even though the content can be copied around, right? So Bitcoin is kind of the first example of that, where you have a scarcity of this coin, and that's indisputable. So therefore, it has value, and we have seen that it has accrued value over time. Very much in the content world, people are trying to play with different concepts around it. I don't think anyone has proven out like a really scalable model that just like works already, and otherwise we would have seen that kind of taking over OTT world. But nevertheless, I think there's a lot of interesting experiments. The other thing that I think is really interesting is the fact that the blockchain technology is built on really strong cryptography kind of building blocks, right? And that creates a lot of new capabilities in the builders developers tool set. For example, they're able to kind of ensure a lot more accountability and transparency and privacy, all provided by just strong cryptography, right? So for example, like, we've been working with Adobe on this project around content authenticity called C2PA, right? So this is the idea that as we're creating content on the internet, we can attach information about who created the content, how the content is created, how the content got produced along this content production pipeline that eventually made it to the to the viewer, right? So especially in today's world where AI is proliferating, and we can see in the near future, like, we wouldn't be able to tell if a video is generated by AI or actually is authentic content. Well, like, to be able to carry that piece of metadata to indisputably show the authenticity of a piece of video is going to become really, really crucial. So then the blockchain creates a really ideal environment for those types of content credentials to live, right? So kind of an example is, you know, if you're watching a video and then there's a credential that shows you, this video was created by Eric, like, would you trust that? Would you trust the credential more if it's stored in someone's private database, or would you trust it more if it's stored on an immutable public ledger that that no one can tamper with it, right? So that's kind of the another interesting areas of exploration.
Speaking a little bit more on that, like, what are some of the like common myths that need to be busted around blockchain in general or decentralized tech in general?
I think one thing that, especially in the video world, there's some, like, well understood things that the blockchain cannot do, right? So for example, the blockchain is really bad at doing scalable computation or streaming or any kind of the things that you really need to do on the core video streaming infrastructure, right? You just in that world, you just need really redundant and really scalable systems, and you can't have a blockchain based technical architecture that replicates the computation on every single node in the world, right? It's just not going to work. So a lot of times, when people even hear the topic about of video and blockchain being mixed together, there's an immediate kind of disbelief or cynicism of, like, oh, that'll never scale. Like, you can never do video streaming using the blockchain, and that, I think, is well found, and that's correct. But I think what's less known is there's actually interesting scalability mechanisms that allows someone to build a system that's redundant and not in the way that needs to repeat the computation on every single node, but still leverage the capability of the blockchain to create a really interesting and robust system that's actually scalable and performant, right? So for example, the way that we do it is the Livepeer network is not a blockchain itself. The network needs to be able to source computation from around the world, right? And it needs to be able to coordinate all that computation around the world to be able to provide security, to make sure that, if I ask somebody to transcode a piece of content, I know that they will do the work correctly, and they can give it back, and they can give the results back to me in a time efficient manner. I also need some kind of payment mechanism, payment rails, to be able to pay the person for doing the work, right? And all of that, coordination work, all of the payment rails, micropayment systems can all be done on the blockchain, and that's actually a really good way of using the blockchain, because the blockchain turns out to is the most effective mechanism for an international payment rail, right? And instead of having to go through traditional payment rails that, good luck with, kind of cross-border payment for micropayment, right? But on the blockchain, it's actually pretty easy to do.
Obviously, the studio is you guys are looking for different ways to innovate when it comes to transcoding in general. What are some interesting trends emerging in video streaming in the industry in general that you're interested in, and how's your company leveraging them?
I'd say, the Livepeer, so Livepeer project's been around for over 8 years at this point, and we've gone through kind of different phases. Livepeer Studio is a product that we've only been building for the last couple of years, the last 2 years really, and we built that because we felt the need to create basically a SaaS service that allows the general kind of the general audience and the market to be able to adapt this technology, and and abstract away some of the complexity that comes with working with blockchain-based systems, right? So things like needing a wallet and doing all these payments, right? Like, and that's hard to do, right? So if you're a video company, if you're a developer, you're trying to build a video application, you don't necessarily want to have to deal with all that stuff. So the thing that we've done with Livepeer Studio is abstracting away all that complexity, just make it a really simple developer experience with a set of easy to use SDK for people to use this platform. Now, in that journey, we've tried a bunch of things, and the most recent area that I'm personally really excited about is around interactive live streaming, right? So as we see, it's still like I think a pretty fringe area as if we look at the broad OTT and streaming world, but I think there's a lot of really interesting experiments, and innovation is always happening at the fringe, right? So that's that's the area that I'm pretty interested about in terms of how the content format is evolving, or how the monetization mechanisms are evolving, and or how people are thinking about increasing operational efficiency. So I think all of those newer lessons that are learned will start to seep into kind of the more broader streaming world.
Yeah, when you talk about interactive live streaming, where are you seeing the use cases for this? Because off the top, what comes to my mind is sports, but I'm interested to hear what your thoughts are.
Yeah, for sure. I think interactive live streaming. People kind of define it differently. The thing that I'm most interested in, the nature of interactive live streaming that I'm interested in is the fact that it's a highly engaging content format where a lot of times the interactivity itself has a higher value than the content, right? So people are going there not yes to watch the content, but the content is almost like a fodder to the actual interactivity, which is the value that people are getting out of, right? So I think that's a really subtle but like important thing about these types of experiences. So when it comes to use cases, I think it's really about introducing a social element into the content consumption experience, right? So in the same way that people prefer to watch sports with their friends than watching it alone, right? Like so, that type of dynamic in sports definitely is true, and I think that's been like largely proven out. That can actually be applied to all kinds of different experiences, and sometimes it's pretty surprising, right? So I think when we talk about interactive live streaming, Twitch is oftentimes the first thing that comes to mind for people because it's the dominant platform. It's been around for 10 years, right? And people and it had this like big rise during COVID. Like I remember like AOC was like doing her thing on Twitch, right? And people are like, well, Twitch has this like mainstream moment. So I think for sure, like if you look at Twitch, the predominant use case is game streaming, right? Like people watching other people playing video games. But that sounds so contrived. Like why would you want to watch other people play video games? Well, it's actually not really about watching other people play video games. That comes back to that interactivity, right? Like I'm not there to watch people play video games. The video game is there to provide a topic of conversation, to provide something to engage in. I'm really there to engage with the person who's streaming the video game, or engage with other people who's also watching, right? And that's like the cool thing. So we see that applied to all kinds of different areas. There's a 24/7 live streamed reality TV show. Not too dissimilar to like a Big Brother type of show, but the new element here is that the viewers can interact directly with the contestants in real time at any point, right? And they can pay to interact with them. So all of a sudden just introduces this whole element, right? And it's this experimental project that's been going on for a couple of years, and they've shown incredible results. It's a really small team that's been doing this. Each season lasts for about 6 weeks. I think the first season they made over $1.6 million just over 6 weeks. 65% profit margin, which is like unheard of in the live streaming world, right? Like even Twitch cannot make money, cannot be profitable over like after 10 years of working on it. So and 50% of that profit, 50% of that revenue came from paid engagement. And one of the things that they do, which is really smart, is they will allow you to pay to type a message, and then there's a text to speech robot in the on scene, and it'll read out the message, right? So as you can imagine, people go crazy around this. Like they type in all kinds of messages. It feels like a way that you can actually participate in the show that you're watching all the time, right? And the message that they type in oftentimes increases the value of the content itself, because the message gets read out loud, and then the contestants are listening to it and they're responding to it. They're having a conversation, and that becomes like the third element that's happening in the room, right? So that's like there's a lot of I think there's a lot of interesting psychology that goes into creating that kind of experience. That's a very much a experimental playground for people. Another example that I want to point to, there's a casino streaming application called MyPrize, where like we know Kick and even on Twitch, right? There's a lot of kind of like casino streaming. For this one, you can actually bet alongside of the streamer. So that's another really interesting kind of psychology that comes in here, right? It's like, okay, you're already watching the streamers that you really like them, you have an emotional connection with them. They're streaming their casino play, they're having fun, winning or losing or whatever. And now you can almost like put your money where it's worth, right? And actually bet alongside of them and participate in that experience with skin in the game, right? And that just amplifies that this like emotional bond, like connection that you're building with them. Yeah, so those are some examples that might be a little out of the mainstream that people might not be paying attention to, but I think really interesting.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And what I really like about both of them is you talk about how the monetization is a key aspect of it for the live streaming. And I'm sure definitely now with how the global economic situation is, everyone is more and more focused on finding different ways to monetize. So having these methods that both guarantee engagement and create greater revenue for the service is definitely a fascinating way to look at this.
Totally, yeah, and it's like with the right design, I think you can really get to like a win-win-win situation where the platform is making more money, the users feel more engaged from that experience, that where they're willing to pay more money, and then the monetization mechanism actually makes the content better, right? Which is like a really interesting loop.
Super interesting. Speaking about just how like economic challenges are kind of pervasive now, have there been any learnings on your journey as a startup that you feel others could benefit from?
So in interactive live streaming, right? Talking about that, since we've been focusing on that. There's been a lot of interesting lessons that we've seen, both from our own experiences and also from the kind of the experience of working with our customers, right? Because a lot of customers that we work with are kind of innovative companies who are trying to create some kind of platform that they're competing with the big platforms out there in some way, maybe unbundling the experience and creating a more specific version, but a more fitting experience, or they're adding a piece of innovative element into it. But what I think one of the pitfalls that we've seen is that people sometimes don't think about the monetization mechanism deep enough before they get started on an idea. And this is like a really challenging problem in the video streaming world, because it costs so much money to build a video streaming platform, right? Like if you don't have experience, like sometimes people don't realize it until it's much later, where as the platform scales in user count, that cost can really scale exponentially, right? So if there's not like a really clear monetization mechanism that's designed into the platform in a pretty native way from day one, it's so easy for the cost to just run away from you. and you will never be able to like respond to it fast enough to then catch up, right? So which is very counterintuitive from building like a more traditional like social platform, right, where the cost of serving a user is much cheaper. So you can like go up to like millions of users for your app and be able to eat the cost for a long time and figure out the monetization later, right? That's how like famously how Facebook became so big. But that same playbook just really does not apply in video streaming because it just like kills you so quickly. Like you never get the chance of getting there. So that's something that we always advise people to do, and that's something that we really just even for our own internal operation, we really pay attention to, right? So the way we think about it is like, what are all the little things that we can do to make our infrastructure platform as as cost efficient as possible, right? So the marketplace based approach is definitely one thing that there's a new thing that we bring to the table, but that's kind of like the big piece. But every other little piece also really adds up, right? How we run our database, like it comes down to be important. How we do data analytics and collect the data, and how we process that data is actually really important. So it requires a lot of kind of engineering rigor to think of those problems ahead of time, so that we can make our operational costs really low, and then we can pass that value on to our customers to make sure that their cost is low as well.
Speaking about your customers, we were recently chatting about how there's been new opportunities in streaming for media personalities with established audience branches to kind of established audiences to branch out of just the social media game and start kind of focusing and creating their own platforms. What do you think led to this, and how can companies like Livepeer and Exito kind of help with this?
Yeah, this is a pretty interesting trend that I feel like I'm starting to see more and more just in the past few years, where I ask myself that too, and I think this is my perspective, strong opinion, loosely held, but I really think it's because a part of it is it's the over investment into the creator economy, right? Like we in the last like I think the tech ecosystem has been talking about this like creator economy concept for, gosh, 10 years at this point, right? And it really kind of started from the social networking platform evolving to become social media platforms, right? Where it's really people are there to consume content instead of and then that's the first motivation, instead of like connecting with each other being the first motivation. So now, as soon as that happened, then creators became a class of like on these platforms, because these platforms all need interesting content, and creators who are producing this content became valuable for those platforms. And so there was a lot of talk about, okay, there's this creator economy, and they need all these tools, they need to reach the audience in different ways, right? But I think what largely transpired is the creator economy only benefited the really large platforms, right? It's the YouTubes and the TikToks that have grown really big. A lot of other companies, I think, who raised money on this like creator economy promise has largely been not as successful, not nearly as successful as these large platforms, right? So now, because they're so dominant, then we got to the point where they have like the platforms have all the power, right? They have all the say, like, because they own the distribution. It's kind of kind of back in the days when cable companies were so powerful because they just like own the distribution, and you had to work through them. So they just called the shots, and they got the good terms. I think the same thing's happening with social right now, and so we're starting to experience a little bit of that backlash where they're too powerful, but what's really making them powerful are the creators who are creating content on their platform, right? And so now we're starting to see those creators who have a large audience on the platform starting to wonder, like, am I getting a good deal on these platforms, or should I actually do things on my own to like monetize my audience in different ways, right? And I think what a lot of creators are doing is treating the social platforms as kind of top of funnel marketing, right? Just like getting awareness and growing their top of funnel audience, but then trying to use different tools outside of the platform to monetize their audience in different ways. Maybe not the whole audience, but their closest followers or their biggest fans. Right, they're starting to do that. So, the first wave was things like Patreon, right, where a lot of podcasters are asking people to go to their Patreon, donate to them, and maybe they release some release the episode first to their Patreon subscribers, and then they release later, that kind of thing. I think now we're starting to see just more of those type of mechanisms start to happen, because there's almost like an infinite design space in how a creator can connect with their fans, right? So I see people do like exclusive content. I see people do like IRL, well, in real life kind of experiences for their fans, like maybe hosting special events or doing special meetups for them. Even like people are paying for like birthday wishes, right? All kinds of things. But to be able to do all of those things, you need to be able to engage with your audience off platform, because you don't get their email addresses on the platform, and that's that's the main thing. So I think that's what's driving a lot of that activity of creators moving off platform, just to be able to start to even execute this playbook, right? And then you start to see them doing all kinds of experiments, trying to create more value for their fan base, for their audience, and monetize in other ways.
It's funny you bring that up. I was actually just at a wedding party where one of the guests purchased a congratulations video from from an influencer, and it was actually really funny. I gotta say, I thought it was a good gift. So it's cool to see how they're trying to leverage their influences. It also reminds me a lot of how kind of fast channels are being used these days, where fast channels are being proliferated to all of the major services, but they're used as sort of these promotional methods to kind of get people back into your systems, where you can then monetize a little bit better on them, or where you can get greater information on them, for you're serving them more accurate ads. You can increase your CPM, that sort of stuff. Really fascinating.
For sure, yeah, exactly. That the fast channel, because there's now so many fast channels, right? So like it's hard to make money in fast channels. Like the programmatic ads like don't really work that well. Like CPM so low now, like it's hard to make that equation work just from the fast channel alone. So I think that makes sense, right? Like using that as a advertising mechanism.
Yeah. Bringing it back just to general live streaming, let's just talk about common pitfalls, common issues people have when they're starting this journey.
So I think picking the infrastructure is obviously a really important thing, because there's I feel like the live streaming world is a pretty crowded space with lots of different vendors. All have very subtle differences, but it's like really hard to tell the actual difference. You really need someone to like really understand the landscape to be able to make the right choice. I think it's if someone is starting to do live streaming, it makes sense for them to take their time and really talk to a bunch of vendors and understand the difference, and form like a strong opinion before just jumping into using a vendor, or using any solution, right? Because it's hard to once you make that choice, it's really hard to switch, because the workflow is pretty brittle, and we all know kind of ripping out a provider to replace with another one is just a huge pain, and like a really tough, a really difficult thing to do. So I think that's always really important. Um, the other thing that I think about is because it's so competitive now in doing live streaming. The I think it's really important to think about like the competitive positioning for what you're offering. Um, I think it's really really difficult today to compete on content alone, right? Because as we saw in the last couple of years, a lot of OTT providers try to only compete on content, and that has caused people to like spend all this money acquiring a big library of content, and then they find themselves sitting on a large library and not knowing how to monetize it, right? Or like losing subscriberships and all that. I think so. So in the live streaming world, maybe it's licenses to stream these events or whatever it is. Maybe it's like acquiring influencers to come and stream on your platform, and that those are all mechanisms for acquiring content. Um, I think that's important, but there needs to be a hook on the back end to that allows you to capture all the value more than just people coming to check out the interesting content and then leave. There really needs to be a strong story around user retention and engagement and managing the audience and creating like an emotional connection with the platform, not the content, right? I think sometimes it's hard to think about, but that's really important.
We've definitely seen this year, especially one of the greatest concerns with any of our customers coming to us is obviously churn. It's obviously something you have to make sure that you're taking deep into consideration.
Yeah. Another thing that I see for live streaming operators is um, people oftentimes start out treating all content as equal, and then they realize, oh, like I need to start segmenting that content in some way and treating them differently. So that oftentimes comes to like whether it's content curation or thinking about operational efficiency. I think it's worthwhile thinking about how different content are actually different in nature in the platform from day one. I was at an event with the DPP a couple of weeks ago, and there was a panel from a bunch of the tier one broadcasters, and I was so surprised. Like, and it was a lady who was in charge of kind of the content operation and the content acquisition, and she said this is like a very prominent like US based OTT tier one broadcaster. She said only less than 13% of all of their content actually makes money, which is like kind of crazy. And she like you look around the room, everyone's like nodding their head. You're like, okay, like this is the same for everybody, right? So okay, so if you have a world where like less than 13% of your content actually makes money, and you're treating all the content the same, then there's room to increase that efficiency, right? So whether it's and by the way, I understand why you need all the other content to create a variety, or just even from a brand building perspective, you can't only offer the 13% of the content that only makes money, right? Because there's other considerations when it comes to building a business, so that makes sense. But from an operational perspective, I think people really have to think about how can I do my best to make sure the 13% of the content actually gives the best experience, and what kind of cost cutting measures can I have for the rest of for the content that doesn't make money, so I don't actually lose money by serving that content, right? So in the UGC platform, sometimes it means only transcoding the video that that has viewers watching them, right? Otherwise, if you're like if all of those streams are coming in and no one's watching them, or there's a very small audience, like the transcoding cost is the same. Like it doesn't make sense to be transcoding thousands of channels at the same time. If you can just transcode the top 13% of your content and save a lot of cost, right? Or maybe it's around the CDN tiering that you do, right? Use the expensive CDNs with the highest SLA to serve the profitable content, but then use the more cost effective CDNs for the lower tier content, right? So there's all kinds of different ways for people to really think about segmenting those content in their library.
Creative cost savings. It's good advice. Eric, before we wrap up here, anything exciting coming up for Livepeer that you'd like to talk about or mention?
Yeah, we continue to see really exciting experiments in interactive live streaming. So definitely we see a lot of creative use cases. We see a lot of growth in sports streaming. We see a lot of growth in the online betting industry, right? So those are the areas that we're really interested in. We're also working on some new initiatives around artificial intelligence. So we've actually been working on research in this area for the last 3 years. The first kind of go at it was really around using AI to make the video content more interactable. Using things like object recognition, object tracking, and scene segmentation to in a really cost-effective way make make like the important objects in the video programmable. We've actually accomplished a lot of this and spun out a company in our ecosystem to who's solely focused on this. It's called MuseMe, and they have a really interesting product where you can basically input any YouTube link, and then there will be like a player overlay. They will process the video. They will break out any they'll kind of segment out any interesting objects, and then you can go into like an admin dashboard to say like, oh, if the user hovers over this object, you do this action. If the user hover over this object, you do this action, right? So you can, they have some interesting demos to show. And another thing that we started working on around AI as of a year ago was introducing generative AI capabilities into the Livepeer network, because a large part of that is GPU clusters. And we started working on this, and there's some interesting applications that are built right now doing things like video meme generation using prompts, or kind of building a more experimental pipelines into to like chain together a bunch of generative steps together. So that's a really exciting area that we're exploring. We actually have a grants program for startups that are working at the intersection of AI and video, given out to up to $40,000 in grants funding for people who are working in this area.
Eric, I really appreciate your time. It was a blast to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Neil.
That's all for the episode. Thank you so much to Eric for joining. It was a blast to talk. If you're interested in learning a little bit more about Livepeer or anything else that he mentioned, feel free to check the description of the episode below. If you have any questions about the episode, or you'd just like to reach out, feel free to send me a message on LinkedIn or send us an email at playback.podcast@excedo.tv. That's all for this episode. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next time.